Yeah. Okay.
Cool. So my name's Tom, and this is Sam.
Oh yeah.
Hi, both of you.
Hello. Well, we're school friends.
Yeah.
And
we're not in school now, as in we met in school.
Yeah, a good 10 years.
You don't
ago.
look like school friends.
Yeah.
You look a bit older.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just started our road into like paranormal investigating. So we have been meeting quite a few times to discuss what we were going to look into, and then one day we just upped with our camera and we went to Minsden Chapel. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, famous ghost there. Yeah.
And we think we might have come into contact with him, and that started the ball rolling when we've been just hitting different places. So we also went to the Hellfire Caves. So we've been trying to keep it very local to where we are, and now we're heading out to Clapham Wood. And we obviously have been doing our due diligence, and you seem like the man with the plan when it comes to Clapham Wood.
Yeah, I mean, are you recording now? Are you?
Oh yeah, we're all good to go.
Yeah. I mean, just so you know who I am, really I started investigating. I had a series of experiences when I was a child, and my parents are quite scientific and skeptical. So their explanation was that I must just have a very vivid imagination, and that was it. But for me, it was something else. There was something else out there. So for the last, it's nearly touching 30 years now, I've been involved in the paranormal. I was a member of the Ghost Club. I was a member of all sorts of localized clubs as well, and went out investigations. Went out with Andrew Green, Peter Underwood, one of the first tiers or first generations of ghost hunters after Harry Price. And I saw how they investigated and how I try to, when I'm researching for my books. I've written 12 books now on ghosts, mainly historical sightings, and I've investigated hundreds of locations. I've investigated Hellfire Caves, as you've said. I think I've been there 12, 15 times. Bisham Abbey, which is, you really should check out if you're not far from Hellfire Caves, that sort of area. Yeah. Bisham Abbey is a fantastic place. Really good ghost story dating back from the Elizabethan times. And my sort of interest is, I don't think you can ever explain anything, but my personal theory, which I talk about on my website, is that I think places become haunted. They attract phenomena. And Clapham Woods is one of those places. And when you go back into the archives, when you look at the experiences of people like Toy Newton or Charles Walker, who have been the main investigators there for the last 30, 40 years, there's something happening there.
Yeah. Yes. Funny you mentioned Peter Underwood, because when we came out of Minsden, it was very much for us a recce of the area before we were actually going to go and do our investigation. But as we headed down, we bumped into a young lad whose dad knew Peter Underwood as well. I can't remember his dad's first name, but his surname was Adams, and he's written quite a lot of books about
Paul Adams,
possibly, yeah. So like, this is for us, everything seems to be just aligning. So we're quite I don't know what it says or what it means coming into contact.
I think you find that in the paranormal is one thing about the paranormal as a whole, and whether you investigate UFO sightings or whether you investigate ghosts, fairies, you name it, there's these little spots of weirdness, and you don't know why things string along, and you try to use your scientific mind as much as possible to try and rule them out. And then sometimes you just have to say, well, I give up. It's something weird, and you'll always get that. There'll always be a nagging doubt of 5 or 10% of what the hell was that,
Yeah.
I tell you what really creeped us out when we went to Minsden. We took my girlfriend's dog with us, and when we got there, the dog completely started freaking out, started kind of pulling us the opposite way, did not want to go anywhere near the actual kind of ruins. Then when we got back, we started watching footage back from Minsden, and the dog literally started barking at the screen and then ran out the room and just would not come back in. So
Minsden's had a really weird reputation for many years. I mean, obviously there's the fake monk photograph that was taken there, but a long time before that, there's reports going back to sort of late Victorian, when the whole ghost explosion sort of happened in the archives. But as I say, it's interesting that just some areas can, you know, you get somewhere like Hampton Court, which has got allegedly 12 ghosts, but you know, you talk to most people who work there, there's hardly anything seen. And then you've got Minsden Chapel that hasn't been habited for what, 200 to 300, 400 years, and that's a very active location. I know 2 or 3 people who go there very, very regular to do ghost hunts there on a Saturday night usually, and they've had some great activity, from rocks being thrown at them to voices, EMF that they've recorded, EMF levels rising and dropping there. So there's some, again, it's like what I say is, I think places become haunted and attract phenomena, and the phenomena isn't just about ghosts. It can be, yeah, it can be UFO, it can be other things as well, coincidences, prediction, and you can also have poltergeist activity in your home as well afterwards.
So actually, that's a good point. So can we link back to that? So first of all, with Minsden, one thing we did find is, I think we went on either a Sunday night or maybe it was a Saturday night. We found evidence that someone is actually using it to do some form of witchcraft and rituals in there. So we found like almost like a homemade altar, a fire pit, and things like that. To at first, using our scientific mind, it seemed that it was someone maybe living in there, like some sort of homeless person. But when you put all the little bits together, I think we kind of,
because there was the bundle of sticks,
yeah,
there was the altar, and when we looked into it, it kind of linked back to Rick. Like,
I think, yeah, I think again, it's this sort of you've got to be careful of kind of what has been portrayed in the media compared to what is actually really happening there. And with Clapham Woods, I investigated something called the Black Alchemist, which was a series of psychic books, psychic questing books, and I also looked at a big rise in black magic, or alleged black magic activity in Britain in the 1960s. And I would almost definitely say, after researching, you know, recent activity, apart from the horse rippings, have you heard of this, where horses are slashed? Apart from that, most of the stuff that you see, and what you probably saw, is probably something quite harmless and more nature related, and often places like Minsden or Clophill. You probably know. Do you know Clophill?
yeah,
Yeah, places like that have always attracted occult activity. I would say 90% of it is fairly harmless stuff, and sometimes it's pranks, sometimes it's pagans or nature religion. So there's nothing really to get too scared about. All the Satanists that I've ever investigated, or the groups that I've ever visited, they've always been in very posh private homes in the middle of Belgravia or London.
really?
They certainly wouldn't mess around in the middle of woods in a deserted chapel. It's too low standard for them.
sure.
So I would just, on my experience, and I've investigated some really big groups and organizations in London, some of the occult groups that are operating there. And when you say Satanists, you kind of think, oh, they're killing things and all that sort of stuff. And most of them, it's just kind of a form of anarchy,
Yeah,
rather
absolutely.
than anything else.
Yeah,
So
sure.
what you probably saw, I mean, depending on the time of the year, was probably something nature related rather than actually something terrifying. I would also say there's a lot of witches out there that also are quite upset that people are going to locations ghost hunting or whatever. So often what they try to do is, and quite wrongly I think, is try and mess with the energy, and they try to make it all peaceful and quiet, so there's nothing there for you to find. So they try to they believe that they can dampen the area, and often you get that in Clapham as well.
So I actually do have some questions about Aleister Crowley, which I was going to ask you a bit later on, but I wanted just to focus now on Clapham Wood.
Yeah.
Because from all of our research, this is the first one. So most locations we've been looking at have this is the story and this is why. But with Clapham Woods, what we seem to find is that there's just a menagerie of high strangeness. So there's the UFOs and that kind of thing. So also, what was, when you went, or what would you say is the focus of the area? What should we be expecting when we go there?
I'll tell you my experience, really. So I'd done the research. I read the books by Toyn Newton, and the experiences there. So I had a lot of sort of high expectation about what Clapham Wood, the village, was going to be like. And I was a bit disappointed that the village is actually just a cul-de-sac. You know, I don't know if you've been yet, but it just looks so ordinary. And I thought, well, this is a bit bizarre. You know, it's not anything special. And then as you walk into the woods, you walk past the barn, which was seen by Toyn Newton and Charles Walker, that was once owned by somebody who was definitely doing some form of rituals. And you get to the church as well, which is next door. And that's when the strangeness kicks in. It's a really bizarre thing, because when you go there, I mean, I've been to plenty of woods, I've been to many areas, and I've investigated woods, Sherwood Forest, because the various things that happen there. But in Clapham, you instinctively feel something that feels almost like a battlefield. I went to Culloden in Scotland, where the massacre of the Jacobites were, and you feel really quite sorrowful and really quite sad. And that's what I felt at Clapham as I walked in. And I was with a team of 10 investigators and a medium there. And we walked all the way through to the large tree where activity happened. And you get this real horrible sensation that something's not happened there. There's something instinctively, and you try to rule it out, that, oh, you're in the middle of the night, it's dark. And one of our party felt very, very sick. We heard footsteps in the middle of the forest, but yet we were in absolute pitch black, because when you get deep into the forest and into the woods, it's very, very, very dark. It really is. And it just doesn't feel right. It's almost like when you're buying a new home, or buying a house or something, and you walk into a house and you think, why don't I like it here? There's an energy, there's a sensation to it. And we tried to work out why we felt like that, and none of us could really felt like it. And it felt very, very heavy, and a lot of us felt almost argumentative. It affects you in that way. But as I say, I mean, from my point of view, and from the people I investigated, there's some very, very weird stuff happening there. Very, very weird stuff.
Did you have any experience or evidence that you came away with it that was sort of tangible proof of stuff that happened or went on there?
I wouldn't say anything that really stood out, but I've talked to other investigators since, and I do recommend them going there. And I've said to people as well, go multiple times, because when I went there, there were certain parts that we went to that really didn't feel well. As you trek through the woods, and I'm sure, have you got a guide, have you, for your visit?
We have not, no.
Right, you're going to get lost. But anyway, as you go through, you go through like this first stage of woods, and it feels really not very nice. You feel like you've been watched, you feel like you've been followed. And one prevalent thing that a number of our party kept feeling was that there was a black, or like a very dark green, almost black mist in the area. And that was something that we constantly picked up, and we constantly felt that there was this following mist as we walked through. You then walk through into this big open area, and psychologically you should feel better, because you're out of the brush, you're out of the woods, and you don't. You actually feel even worse. You feel that you're being followed by, and possibly watched by, multiple people. So I think for you two, if it's just you two, then you're going to feel very paranoid all night. You're going to feel like you've been watched, and you just got to watch your own sensibilities. It's going to be one of them. And I think, again, the nature of the paranormal is that it's subtle. So you really need to be recording and watching, and we came away. We had some good voice recordings on EMF. I didn't record anything myself, but I know colleagues did. And it's one place that I would love to go back and multiple times. But I mean, I live in North Yorkshire, so it's quite a trip now to Clapham.
Yeah. The mist is something that I have seen pop up in pretty much everyone's reports. And this is what makes it weird again, is because mist in the forest does usually accompany UFO sightings and that kind of things. Like Rendlesham, like they said, like there was a lot of mist there and that kind of thing. But also, I mean, it could just be natural occurrence. So do you think Clapham Wood, using everything that you've done, is the cause of the activity there? Is it the ritual murders that supposedly took place, is it that it's a place of power, like some occultists believe, or like with the UFO kind of stuff, or is it just general, haunted woods activity?
I think it goes beyond just kind of a haunted woods activity in that, as I say, I've investigated Sherwood Forest, and Sherwood Forest is very much split up, but it's got similar sort of UFO sightings, that Bigfoot, that sort of thing. Yeah, believe it or not, a Bigfoot, or at least some sort of beast. But what I would say with Clapham is it seems to date far back in history. So I think it's far beyond any sort of occult. I can't believe. I don't think we can say that it's occult orientated. But I certainly think there is something there that we are missing. It could be. People talk about ley lines. I don't personally believe that it's some form of ley line. But what I do believe is it's kind of phenomena after phenomena. It's layered and layered and layered and layered. And let's say in that consciousness around that area, it's built up this reputation of pure weirdness. And whether the UFOs are some sort of manifestation of this weirdness, I'm not saying that these are real nuts and bolts craft that people are seeing, because most often that people are seeing hovering lights or big balls of light. Yeah. It would certainly suggest that there is some sort of tectonic expulsion of static electricity, and that's probably why people feel so weird. But what makes it weird for me is where between 1967 and 1975, you've got all the disappearances in the area.
Yeah.
And it's when I investigate things like what I'm terming as haunted fields, and I looked at Whitechapel when Jack the Ripper happened, and there was tons of ghost things happening there. There was all sorts of things happening. There's a lot of phenomena, and also it includes people disappearing. It also it involves weird murders and things like that. And that's what Clapham Wood's got. It's the perfect example of an area that's seemingly gone strange. Not bad. I don't want to say bad, because some people have had activity and seen things, and it's just been, quite a scary sight. But it's not being negative. But I certainly think that there was an occult group there, or an occultist who was there operating around that time, late 1960s. There were certainly reports in the newspapers at the time, and it was in Eric Maple's book as well, that there was activity in the area. So there was.
So I read a letter was sent to a police officer that basically outlined the fact that someone knew more than they let on about the murder of. He was a police constabulary, I believe he was anyway. That went missing, and they said they found his body 6 months later, and then they received a letter that said it was some form of proof, and they were calling it Friends of Hector. Is that correct?
Friends of Hecate.
Hecate, that's right. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, that ties in with the Black Alchemist stuff that was happening, and I basically, again, it's on my website. I talk about the year of the Black Alchemist, in which you have this year of really, really weird activity. A lot of it's on the south coast, Pevensey. In one night, Pevensey Church, a vicar came into the church, saw lights, and somebody had basically made a circle of candles, and they'd put the cross upside down, and they were doing something, and he disturbed them. So whether it was just the 1960s psychedelic, that sort of interest, and it led into occult activity, but I would definitely say that there's something weird about Clapham. It's being manipulated by people on a magical level, trying to do something with the energy. Whether it involved murders, I mean, that really does take a real dark side, and it does make you wonder what really was going off there. And it suggests also that the police know far more as well. It's interesting, when I went there, we tried to talk to a couple of people who lived in Clapham Wood at the village, and they just really flat refused and said, if you know what's good for you, you need to get out of here.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So it's like, so if I was you, when you pull up at Clapham Wood, as I say, it's like almost like a cul-de-sac. Just pull up carefully, and then just kind of follow the footpath and go in. Don't talk to anyone.
So we've got two parts to our investigation. So we're going in the daytime, first of all, just to have the general, like you say, like find the layout of the area and get the feeling. And then we're going back in the evening to have hopefully the experiences. But is there any link between, do ghosts come out at night? Is that Is that real? Is that not? Am I more likely to see something at 10 o'clock at night than I am at 10 o'clock in the morning?
Well, because it's the 3 a.m. thing, right? That's the kind of go-to hour. I think they call it switch hour or something like that.
No, well, witching hour is 12 till 1, but I always remember the Ghost Club doing some research in the late 70s, and they took statistical data over every single ghost sighting, and they worked out that Thursday morning at 4:30 is the best chance to see a ghost.
Oh, right.
It's something really weird. But what I would say is, if you read any ghost book, and the sightings are split 50-50, and certainly as an investigator, you have to be observant, because as I said before, the nature of paranormal is to be subtle. It's the subtle changes that you don't realize, where you set up two cameras and a trigger object, but the camera that's actually focused on the trigger object is switched off by unseen forces. Why does that happen when something is going to happen? And there always seems to be some form of intelligence there, and there's this trickster element, and Clapham Wood has that trickster element. I know we were all sat there having sandwiches in the middle of the night and a cup of tea, that sort of thing. My friend stood up and his shoelaces were tied, and yet it was kind of, it's just little weird things like that, and things going missing or torches going a bit weird. Normally I'd kind of dismiss all of that, but Clapham Wood's got that sort of weirdness to it. And as I say, do have a look at some of the maps on there. That there's the large tree in particular that you've got to go to, and it's got the back road on there, and that's a place that really does have a lot of activity around there.
Right, that's very helpful.
God, I'm scared already.
Yeah. In terms of your personal belief, what do you believe that ghosts are, or what the activity is? Have you come to any conclusions yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that ghosts are recordings in the consciousness. It's interesting you mentioned about the mist and how mists are seen in woods and on cliff edges. And if you look at the research of T.C. Lethbridge, who was a dowser and an archaeologist, he saw the correlation between suicides and where places are misty, and he believed that somehow static electricity or consciousness was kind of trapped into moisture and mist. And it's interesting that a lot of haunted places, or where people see something physically, are haunted by ghosts, and these are things that don't interact with you. They're seen and then disappear. They're like a recording. So I think we're dealing with two things: is a ghost a recording from time that's triggered by either us or some environmental factors, and then the other thing that I believe we're dealing with is spirit, and that's where I believe there's some form of consciousness or something behind it that seems to interact with us. It shows some form of intelligence. I'd like more evidence of that, so I always keep a very open mind, and I always try to be as tough as I can on any evidence, because essentially I want the best evidence possible. So I always believe that I'm not entirely 100% sure that you can actually video a ghost or video a spirit, but I certainly believe that you can record it in sound. I think EVP is the biggest forms of evidence, and the most successful forms of evidence as well, because you can run it through spectrographs now, and you can see that sometimes the speech that comes from a ghost, if you want to call it that, is often beyond the hearing, our own hearing. It's kind of
we had the exact thing. We found the best EVP ever, and once we managed to, because we were listening, we did a session and there was no sound at the time, and when you played it back, we got this EVP, we slowed it down and everything, and it said, "Who are you?" And we were absolutely terrified. And then we found out that it's an audio recording playing in a room sort of 300 meters down the way that we just hadn't been aware of.
Oh wow. Well, at least he was able to rule it out,
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what our project's about. That it's not about being these YouTube ghost hunters that go to Derring Woods and scream for 20 minutes. This is about proving what is real and what isn't. And so I'm very much paranormal inclined. Sam is quite conspiracy theory led. So that's kind of the two elements to it. Now I've mentioned it, have you been to Derring Woods?
To which wood, sorry?
Derring Woods.
What's Derring Wood, sorry?
Yeah, apparently it's the most haunted woods in the UK, but I had never come across it either until it was on YouTube about 2 weeks ago.
All right. No, I've not. I mean, the main ones that stand out for me, certainly in your area, is Clop Hill, if you can get close. Clop Hill just seems to have some very, very strange experiences. It's very similar to Clapham in that in the 1960s, there was graffiti, satanic or allegedly satanic graffiti on the side there, and there was people there was Satanists or something seen. So I think Clop Hill is something definitely you've got to check out. Whether Saturday night is worth doing. And have you tried Thunderidge Church as well?
No, so this is our third location in Clapham Wood, so we are all open for anything you can recommend. We're also heading to Cornwall in August to have a look around there, and we're going to go to Stourbridge because we're going to look into the Bella and the Witch Elm.
Right, yeah. So yeah. I mean, that is fascinating, and the fact that the graffiti kind of appeared afterwards.
Yeah.
You've got Meon Hill and you've got Bella and the Witch, which are two murders that happened, within about 20 years of each other, but both very mysterious and got various sort of connotations. One was obviously Meon Hill was related to possibly a satanic or witchcraft related murder, and Bella in the Elm was almost certainly seemed to be something to do with World War II and spying in the area.
Yeah, they possibly. The thing that always gets me with the Witch Elm story is the fact that there were two people that heard her screaming.
And
sort of 18 months before, and she was obviously just trapped inside that tree, bleeding out, which is horrible. Yeah, I'm not really looking forward to heading up there really, because there's very much within like living history as well. So, but so is a lot of the murders in Clapham Woods, to be fair. Do you think that we, as just in general in society, we sort of think the older places, or if something horrible happened a long time ago, then it's somehow more haunted than something that happened in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, I think, well, what's interesting is pre-internet and pre-Most Haunted, and if you talk to people and said, what does a haunted house look like? It would have to be 100, 200 years old. It would have to, kind of be deserted. Somebody would have had to have been murdered there and all this sort of thing. And with the internet, with people doing their own YouTube videos, Most Haunted coming out, we've got places like Pontefract Drive, East Drive in Pontefract, sorry. We've got these modern places where people are now beginning to open up a little bit more, that possibly a place that was built in the 1960s could actually be haunted. Mm-hmm. But my argument would be anywhere could really be haunted. Wherever there's been human inhabitation, there could be a haunting. And what I always try to look for is long habitation. So Clapham Wood, that area has been inhabited by people for nearly 2,000 years. And you look at things like Thunderidge Old Church in Hertfordshire, which you guys really should do. Again, that's a place that dates back to Roman times and Norman. It's got tons and tons of history, and again, it's got sort of occult and ghostly activity happening there. So I'd argue that, personally, it can be anywhere, but I certainly believe that, certainly because of YouTube, people like to wander in the woods, and certainly at night.
Yeah, and that's certainly one thing we want to avoid as well. We don't want to have a load of videos of just us walking through and screaming at trees. But on that point, we're going to go to Chanctonbury Ring as well.
Yeah.
Because that's probably about 20 minutes outside, right, of Clapham Woods.
Yeah.
We're going to try and see if we can summon the devil by running around the trees, which I'm sure we probably cannot.
You'll probably trip up and...
Yeah, we'll let you know what happens. But just on that point of going back to the occult stuff, have you done any research into Aleister Crowley, and how far did you stretch it?
I'm a practicing occultist, so I know Aleister Crowley inside and out. And again, it's the media representation of what Aleister Crowley was about. If you imagine, Aleister Crowley is the magical version of Donald Trump. Right. So a lot of what he wrote about was bullshit. And then he basically took a load of magical information from the OTO, which was a group that he was involved in, and the Golden Dawn, and he kind of tried to modernize it and bring it through there. But for 30, 40 years of his life, he was a heroin addict. He tried to set up his own commune in Sicily, in Italy. He failed all the way through. He was a very bad poet. He tried to write poetry books. And in fact,
poetry, though, wasn't it? Very much of the play that image of that I'm this big bad beast 666.
That's why he called himself the Beast and the 666. And he went to Greenwich. He actually went to Greenwich Village in New York to try and become a painter. And nobody really got his paintings. He's a failed poet. He's a failed painter. He's a failed magician in a way. It's just that he was the last remnant of the Victorian magicians. You've got Mathers, you've got McGregor, all these people from the Golden Dawn, and he kind of lived on. So he was the last remnant, and people at that time in the 1940s, they kind of worshipped him. I mean, he was in Netherwood in Hastings, which was a retirement home. He was a very poorly thin man, and I think I've heard that the amount of heroin he was having per day would have killed somebody normally, and he survived on that for 30, 40 years. So maybe magic does work. I don't know.
It seems to be maybe he was not too dissimilar from Rasputin in that effect. Then of that, his legend was far exceeded him, and he sort of perpetuated it himself, or at least that's what. I've read things by people like Ethel Colquhoun, who was a surreal artist at the time, and she, before she met him, actually worshipped him. She loved everything that he did, and when she met him, she said he was just sort of a reedy thin person who had a very whiny voice. And if you listen to the recordings of his voice, or if you go onto YouTube and type in Aleister Crowley ritual or whatever, you'll hear him doing various occult rituals, and it's almost, you could laugh at it because it sounds so. His voice has got so thin and high pitched. You wouldn't expect him to sound like that. And I think it's one of those things where. Well, you really what you doing.
So you just broke up there. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Seems to be
Hi.
a bit.
There we go.
So I think the big question for us, which is Clapham Wood, again, what is your, give us the biggest piece of advice that you can give us in terms of just going in there, finding, you've covered some of it already, but just if you could sum it up in one word, what should we do? What should we not do?
I think if I went, my suggestion for you is that you obviously go there and try not to get too paranoid, because that could end the investigation within an hour or two. I don't know how long you're planning on staying there, but don't get too paranoid. What is
a good amount of time?
Well, if I was you, you need to be there from. You're going in the day, and if I was you, I'd try and get there for sort of between 10. I'd run it from 10 till 2. Get that dusk, so you can see around. You might see the odd deer here and there. You'll get used to your surroundings, and I would certainly do EVP. I would certainly do calling out. I certainly wouldn't do anything too offensive, and what I mean by that is swearing and stuff like shouting out and that sort of thing. But I would certainly kind of really try to get something to interact, and maybe try, even though you're outdoors, do put down a dictaphone and do call out, do ask, and do ask for something to be there. And there's enough activity in that area for something to happen. And just be aware of your surroundings all the time, because it's very, very unusual. It will feel very unusual, and I'm sure that one of you will, kind of really not feel right. Even the most hardened skeptics there kind of think, what have I let myself into?
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right. Definitely get yourself to that church at the beginning. You can't go in, but all around that church and next door, There's been some very, very weird sightings around that church. And then when you walk into the woods, you almost feel like you're stepping into you're almost going into an experience. You walk past the church, you walk up, and you walk into the woods, and you do think to yourself, what have I let myself in for?
Yeah.
I mean, I went with 8 people, so I was fine, but just 2 of you.
When you are calling out, what sort of questions do you ask?
I try to be as respectful, because I think, well, if we are dealing with something that lived like us, how would you take it if somebody said, you know, kind of, oh, you miserable sod or whatever, you know, kind of, you'd say piss off and walk away. So try and be respectful and say, you know, if there's anything here that wants to communicate with us, can you make a sound? Can you talk to us? Yeah. Can you communicate with us somehow? Is there anything? And I would say, is there anything here that is ancient? Is there anything here that wants to talk to us? Can you make a noise? Can you make a sound? Maybe set something up. I'd be tempted to maybe take a couple of trigger objects that you can kind of monitor or not be too far away, and just see, you know, kind of set them up, walk away. I'd be tempted to take something like cakes and ale. And what I mean by that, not for yourself, but because it's got so many witchcraft connotations at Clapham Wood, and certainly Wicca and paganism, then one of the biggest offerings that they do is cakes and ale. So take a little glass of mead and some crusty bread, leave it out on the plate, put your dictaphone there, and see if something interacts.
Yeah, that's very good advice. Okay, one last question from me. So there's 4 of us in our group, right? 2 of us are very open to doing a Ouija board. 2 are absolutely terrified of it. What is your verdict on Ouija boards and that kind of thing?
I think 2 things. Firstly, a Ouija board started out as a game. It was designed as a board game because Victorians knew that we all suffered from muscle twitch when we put our arms out. You put your arms out, and after 5-10 minutes, your arms begin to twitch, and it begins to, you know, spell out words. However, it can be a good tool for communicating. The thing is as long as all 4 of you can trust each other that the other one's not going to move it, and it is genuinely moving, then you've got something unusual. And if it starts spelling things out, that'll be interesting. And I think you're going to be surprised. I think if you do get activity on the Ouija board, there's nothing to worry, by the way, because all it's doing is move all the nonsense you hear about people using a Ouija board and suddenly, you know, the glass spins off and it smashes or whatever. Might, you know, it's not as fearsome as you think. But I would do it, and I would ask for a name or for yes and no, and I think you'll get good yes and no. And that's no different from pendulum dowsing. And you wouldn't go around saying, "Are you scared of pendulum dowsing?" But, you know, it's because it's a Ouija board, because it's been in countless films, everybody thinks it's a negative thing. It can be, if, as I say, if you maybe encounter something that tries to mess with you. So it might start spelling out names that you might remember in your life, and you might say, "Oh, that's a friend who I think I used to have at school," or something. And then if you start attributing personal things to it, that's when you start causing problems.
Cool. But as long as you say goodbye, you're all good, right?
Don't matter. You can say piss off at the end of it. But no, it's about being respectful, you know, I think, and just saying thank you for your communication, you know, because let's face it, whatever we're dealing with is non-physical, and it has to do something in a physical means. So if it's taking all that energy to do that, then surely we should say, as you say, goodbye and thank you, instead of just, you know, kind of get lost or whatever.
Because I guess I grew up on kind of the horror stories of this like possessions and like things like that. Like my dad's got this thing of like, if you go into like a haunted area of some sort, you should go home and have a shower and wash your clothes, because spirits can like latch onto you and kind of follow you home, and stuff like that is the reason why I'm like, Tom's the kind of like skeptic and more brave one out of the 2, and I'm the one that's like freaked out of what can happen next. If you do come into contact with like ghosts or spirits or whatever, I guess if you do annoy them or what's the word, intimidate them or whatever, is there danger of coming into contact with them?
Well, I'll tell you now. obviously MJ Wayland is the name I use to write books. But I also founded the first ghost hunting company in the world. I started Fright Nights with my wife in 1999. Nobody had ever done any ghost hunts at all. Between 1999 and 2015, when I effectively retired from ghost hunting, we took well over 750,000 people on ghost hunts. We did the world's biggest ghost hunt where we had over 2,000 people on that event. I've witnessed countless things that have happened with people, and nobody of those people ever took anything home. Nobody, well, maybe apart from pinching my equipment, but nobody ever took a ghost home. Nobody ever phoned up and said, you need to come around because my daughter's flying around the room, or this and that. So you really don't have anything to worry about. The whole theory about having, kind of washing yourself after having an experience with a ghost, that comes back from the beginning, from Greece, from early religions, that whenever to remove negative energy, you wash yourself in lemon and you wash yourself in chives, and it cleanses you. So that's where that's come from, and it does continue on. And certain voodoo sort of religions will actually still suggest that you use various oils to get rid of negative energy.
Dad's doing voodoo, mate. That's what it is.
Well, like, I'm like Sri Lankan heritage, so like I come from a line of like kind of cousins and aunties and uncles that have kind of dabbled in, well, black magic, so to speak, and whatever else. So
yeah.
This is why I kind of got first-hand stories and why it freaks me out so much, because I like my dad and cousins or whatever else have seen it first-hand rather than just horror stories, so to speak.
What I like about the Sri Lankans, some of the traditions, if I remember correctly, they will carry little bones that are carved into little figures, and that bone might have belonged to a monk from 400 years ago, and they believe that they've got the power of that monk, or they might.
Mate, show them what you've got.
I'm not wearing it at the moment. But when I told my dad I was doing this, he calls it a dog whistle, because it literally looks like a dog whistle.
Like a little dog whistle.
It's like a little silver kind of pendant that's got a chant from a monk inside that protects and scares away any bad spirits or demons.
But if we ever see a werewolf, we can kill it as well.
There you are. Just get him to blow that out. Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm sure you'll have a good time there, and as I say, you've got to keep each other's spirits up, if you know what I mean. It will feel very paranoid and it is very, very dark. It's a really strange place, and keep recording and keep experimenting. The one thing that is lacking in the paranormal is that, as you say, you look at YouTube or you look at how people investigate. They go out, investigate, come back. There's no experimentation. There's no sort of exploring. There's no, emphasis on that, and good observation as well. Just being observant of how you are feeling or how the area is, smells. Kind of how things are at that time. So just be very, very observant and aware of yourselves and the area.
And is it good? So we are going to go for about 3 to 4 hours. Is it good to set up camp in one spot and spend an hour there, or is it good to continually move through a space that supposedly has activity?
If you're planning on doing another trip, then I would suggest that, maybe this one is your big recce, because I think after this one, I think you'll be tempted to go back. I know everybody who's gone there said, I'll only go once, but they always end up going back again. But I personally would maybe work out your time. So maybe you spend an hour and a half in one area, then you move on and do some more time there, and maybe do 3 spots. If you're going to be there for about 4 hours, then maybe to do 2 or 3 spots where you can try experiences, maybe try around the church, and then move on and see what you get.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for your insight. And before we go, is there anything you would like to plug? Anything you would like to shout out to?
Just go to mjwayland.com if you want to read some free articles on ghosts and weird stuff.
I absolutely second that. I think I've really loved looking through your site, and I think it's been a very good tool, along with extra research around, to really gather stuff up. So I do think that's absolutely correct. Well, once we've got all our evidence in, we'll share it with you, and then hopefully we can get some further insight from you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever need any ideas or tips or anything like that, as I say, the Thunderidge, I don't know, whereabouts are you based? Are you...
So we live near Heathrow Airport at the moment.
Oh, right.
He's Croydon. So yeah.
Well,
And then
it's Hertfordshire way, and it's
Oh,
Thunderidge.
yes.
Yeah, you want to check it out because it's a bit off the beaten track in that it's not on every ghost tourist area, you know.
what was the name? Sorry.
Thunderidge.
Thunderidge.
Yeah, and it's worth checking out in the future if you decide that you want to do another investigation. And it's very well known. There's lots of information out there about Thunderidge Church. It's disused. It's been deconsecrated, but it's a really, really weird place. It's well worth going. And if you ever need any advice or anything, you've got my email, and I'll always reply back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
No problem at all. Have a good one. I can't wait to find out what happens. Take care.
Before you go, you still there?
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe take a picture for social.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take a quick selfie for social media. Oh, hold on.
Sweet. Thank you very much.